I may have mentioned this friend of mine once or twice along the way. He passed away earlier this year. One of my best friends in Hawaii, a gentleman named Ron. I met him because he had called a friend of a friend asking for prayer because he had colon cancer. And I went over and prayed with him, and he had surgery and it was successful and everything, and we just got to be friends. And I ultimately had the opportunity to lead him to Christ. And Ron's my mother's age, so he was in his late 70s when he came to know the Lord, which is rare, you know, for somebody that age to do that. But he had been a man whose career was involved in doing rebar on massive civil projects, dams and bridges and all those sorts of things. Just a strong and vital man. And I met him at the very end of that. Not long after that, he was told he couldn't go on a certain project because he was too old. Now, I'll tell you, he had some sickness and things like that, and there's a point to all this, I'll get there in a minute. He had some sickness and some things that happened to him, and it had hobbled him some. But if he were here today, I would put my money on him against anybody. He was the strongest man I think I'd ever met. And I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about now. He had gotten to the point where he couldn't walk as well, so he was using a cane. And he had gone to the Burger King in town to get a breakfast sandwich. And there was a homeless young man just outside the door, and he was hitting Ron up for some money. And at this point, Ron was driving Uber, which is part of the story, and so he didn't have a lot of cash. And so when he asked my friend Ron for money, Ron said, "I don't really have any," and he was more than likely telling him the truth. Well, the guy didn't like that, so he kicked Ron's cane out from under his hand, kind of kicked it across. Ron, at this point, is like 86, 87, this is like last year, reaches down, grabs that cane, and comes up and took the guy out. I mean, just off his feet. Off his feet.
Knocked him out.
Cold cocked him. Knocked him out. Somebody was standing there, he said, I'll stand behind you on that. I know what he did to you, or whatever, you know. But it was just this really, really strong man. But toward the end of his life, he had through some things that really weren't his fault. He had lost most of his fortune and had been driving Uber for the better part of, I don't know, 7 or 8 years at that point. And you know, it was tough because we were really good friends. And even after we moved here, by the way, that was one of the hardest things about moving here, was leaving him, because he was a dear friend. And we got together every week, and we used to call it the summit meeting. And we solved all the world's problems every week. And but he was a guy that had done projects all over the world, had been in over 70 countries doing these big civil projects, and had been a well-respected man. And I found out through some people he was really respected in his field. But toward the end, because of health, because of finance, his world had just kind of gotten smaller and smaller and smaller. We would talk, and he was just, he had such regret in his life over things. But, you know, I said, well, I always told him, I said, Ron, I said, the Lord is bigger than whatever mistakes you've made. And he said, I just don't know why I'm still here. And I said, well, God does. He knows why you're here. And lots of times in his Uber, when he was driving around, he would invite people to church. He'd tell them about Jesus. And I said, well, see, he's using you. But after we moved here and we'd get on the phone, it was a pretty dark time for him. And he would tell me all the things that were going on. And I said, Ron, I said, you know, you just need to focus on Jesus, man. That's all you can do at this point. And, you know, and he told me, he said, and this is the point of this whole story. He said, you know, I'm driving around in that car, and he said, I can't tell you how many times during the day that I pray and thank God for what I do have. He said, it's not much.
I do too.
Amen. You know, I mean, and as he would say that to me, I think, you know, so many people have so much and they have no idea how fortunate they are. Here's my friend who You know, he was scraping by to be able to pay the rent and things like that, but he was still thankful, you know. And right up to the day he died, literally up to the day he died, he was still driving Uber. He was still out there getting it done. He almost was 89 when he died. And, you know, just the Lord had given him such strength and what have you. But wasn't a lot of good stuff in his life, but the good stuff he had, he was thankful for. And that kind of speaks to what this passage in James is about. My sermon title today is All the Good Stuff. We want to talk about that today. We're in James chapter 1, verses 16 through 18. And let me give you a little run-up before I read the passage. The book of James is a great book. And it's very practical in its theology. But the first 15 verses of this, James is really talking about having patience through trial. And he talks about the fact that when you're not sure what your next step is, to pray and ask for wisdom. Because God will give it liberally. And by the way, I claim that promise a lot. You know, it's like, Lord, you told me if I ask, you'll give it to me. I'm asking again. But then as he kind of goes through that, he turns and he starts talking about temptation. And you know, you think about that. Isn't that the way it is in the human existence lots of times? When we're up against it, when we're struggling in things, that's sometimes when the temptations really come rolling in. Because the kind of the human mindset is like, well, I'm trying to live right and it's not going good, so why am I even trying, right? But he says, you know, that temptation is a function of our flesh. It's not from God. God doesn't tempt us. God tests us, but God does not tempt us. You know, I'm always reminded of the old Flip Wilson show, right? The devil made me do it.
Oh, Flip Wilson, the devil made
Now, James would say it's not even the devil, it's us.
It's us.
You know, we're bad enough. We don't need the devil most of the time. So, you know, he goes from that. And then we have this hinge verse. This is where I'm going to start, verse 16. James writes this. Do not be deceived, my beloved brethren. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above and comes down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow of turning. Of his own will he brought us forth by the word of truth, that we might be a kind of firstfruits of his creatures. I call it a hinge verse, and that's actually a technical term when you see that in the Bible and in literature, where verse 16 looks back at what he just has written, and then it also looks forward. I think there's a lot of folks that are anti-God because they think God is stacking the deck against them. Right? Just put a, you know, why God? And James's readers may have been thinking that, quite frankly. But I do know this, God would never set the rules and then put us in a position to go against those rules, right? And that's a debate we have in our world today, because people say, well, if God made somebody that way, why is the church against it? It's like, well, God didn't do that. You know, we need to understand how God created this universe, and then the fact that it's perfect, and then we sin, but if he made it and said it was good, then he's not going to make rules against that, at least that I've been able to figure out. But looking forward, no one can take the ultimate credit for any of the good in our lives. And that's what I really want to talk about today, right? Because the old Sinatra song, I did it my way, right? Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. If I do it my way, it's probably not going to turn out so well. The fact is that any success we have in their life is based on who God is and what he's done. Verse 17. You guys remember, this really ends up being, this sermon ends up really being a capstone to something we've been on for about 5 weeks, right? We started out, we talked about, 4 weeks ago, we talked about that we have a young earth and God created it. And then the week after that, we talked about creation versus evolution. The week after that, we talked about having different worldviews based on how we see where the world came from, right? And then last week, while it didn't seem like it, it kind of did fit in where we talked about being lovers and not haters. Because what we were talking about was being able to converse with somebody who has a different worldview than we do. And for it not to look like hate, but to explain to them that we love them. Right? And so this kind of ends up being the capstone on it because of some of the phraseology there. And you know what, I give God the credit for that. He sent me to this passage, and then I started studying it again. And I was like, oh, okay, that is kind of reflective of creation, as we look into this, the Father of lights, is really a picture of creation. We'll look into that a little deeper, but there's also something here. How many of you have heard the phrase parallelism? Parallelism.
Oh, sure.
Hebrew parallelism, right? We see it all through the Psalms, right? All through the Psalms. And parallelism has a lot of different forms, right? But essentially what it does is you read this in the Psalms a lot, where it seems like they say the same thing twice, but it's the first is a statement, and the second usually augments that in some way. Okay? Sometimes it's the opposite, sometimes it's the same. And parallelism, you can go study that. There's books on it. But we see a reflection of that here. And do realize that James is writing to a predominantly Jewish believer set of readers. So for him to use Hebrew parallelism would very much catch their attention very quickly. So you see that there, right? Every good gift and every perfect gift, right? So there's a parallel that's there, and one enhances the other. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above. Remember though what verse 16 says, don't be deceived. Everything good is from God. What is James doing here? This is where I'm going to sound like I'm going to go off the rails for a few minutes, but I want to talk to you about a pretty important theological concept. Philosophers, theologians have debated for as long as the church has probably been in existence about the problem with evil. Why is there evil in the world? Now there's moral evil, man's inhumanity to man. And then there's more like natural evil, if I can call it that. Earthquakes, tidal waves, those kinds of things, right? And does anybody know what that is called when you set up a philosophical system to answer the question of where evil comes from? Anybody know what that's called?
Hypothesis?
There's a phrase for it. You probably don't. It's not a real well-known word. It's called a theodicy. Right? That's not like the Odyssey and the Iliad. A theodicy. Theodicy. Theo, God. D-I-C-Y is about justice. God's justice. Right? And so I was doing some study on this the other day and just looking into it again, because it's a phrase that comes up in different places, but it's not as frequent as a lot of the other theological terms. So, but the basic question is, if God is all-powerful, all-knowing, and perfectly good and loving, why does evil and suffering exist in the world that He created and He governs?
Because He gave us free will.
Well, now see, you're creating or espousing one of the theodicies that's come into the world, okay?
Can you say what those two words mean again?
Theo is God.
Okay.
And then dicy, D-I-C-Y, is from the Greek word dike, which means righteousness or justice. God's justice.
Thank you.
And so, and by the way, full disclosure, I do use AI sometimes. I mean, I've got theology books and stuff, but I just asked Grok the other day, I said, so talk to me about theodicy, and he printed me out all this stuff, and I double-checked all of it against my theology books, but he did such a nice job that I just took it. So there you go. Give credit to the internet where you need to. Here is the basic question of evil. Is God willing to prevent evil but not able?
No.
No, because then He would not be omnipotent.
Right.
Is He able but not willing? No, because then He would not be benevolent. He would not be loving. Is He both able and willing? Yeah. So then, why is there evil? Right? That's the question. And by the way, this is kind of a ground level, talking to your neighbor kind of question, right? I mean, that's where Ann and I were talking the other night. She goes, I just don't get it. If your God is so good, why is there so much junk in the world? And she wasn't even thinking about earthquakes and tidal waves. She was talking about evil people, right? I mean, you just think about something as widespread and insidious as human trafficking in our world. Think about that. I mean, it was awful in Hawaii, because where Hawaii was, it was a crossroads, you know, in the Pacific. I mean, there was a ton of that stuff there. Crazy stuff. But the theodicy is a Christian response that says actually all three of those attributes can remain intact, and here's how. So I want to give you just a few. First, Augustine had the free will defense, because most evil comes from humans' free choices, or demonic choices, right?
Or angel.
Yeah, say demonic, right? And so, but here's the thing. Genuine love requires freedom. God made us free. And so that means because we're free, that evil is possible. And that's the reality. So that's your moral evil. Irenaeus talked about something called soul making. And I'm just going to give you a real quick rundowns on these. He said that God didn't make us perfect, but God created us as spiritual beings so that through having to encounter evil in our lives, it would grow us. And this is very biblical, right? Because testings and trials perfect us. That's what the Bible talks about. So that, you know, if you don't have trials, it's like the idea of the caterpillar and the chrysalis, right? I mean, they have to struggle and push and fight and push to break that open to be the butterfly. If you tear that open before they're ready, they don't have the strength to fly and they'll die, right? And so in a very real sense, the evil in our world strengthens us so that we're ready for God's usage, okay? You're squinting at me. Does that make good sense?
No, that's my eyes, but
Okay.
the sun.
Okay. All
Sorry,
right.
no,
it's good.
don't take that, yeah, don't
That's all right.
interpret that.
Okay, all right. I'm sorry. Do we need to put the blind down? Would that
No,
help
it's
you?
fine. It's
Okay.
fine.
All right. Now, here's the thing. I love, and by the way, I was talking to somebody just recently who has a son-in-law or a daughter's boyfriend or something that's a philosophy major, and I'm going, wow. I barely survived one college philosophy class. I don't know about you guys. That stuff just, my head doesn't get around that very good. You know, but I do remember this name, Gottfried Leibniz. He was a well-known philosopher, yeah. He talks about the best possible world, and I love this, and I will read this. This is literally the best of all possible worlds God could have created that still achieves his goals. In other words, he said, is there an infinite number of ways God could have created the world? Do you guys believe that? I do. I mean, I don't know what those are. That's why I think there's probably life on other planets, because I think, you know, he's got an infinite number that he could have created. So we happen to be the best, you know. And it's that balance. And by the way, this is a theological discussion, right? God's sovereignty versus man's free will, right? I mean, there's volumes written on that. And if you get somebody that's a sovereignty person, which are like the Calvinists, and then you come at them with free will, it can get to be a pretty spicy conversation, so for what it's worth. There's some other ones as well in here, but these are all different ways that theologians and philosophers have tried to explain how a loving and mighty and powerful God still has evil in this world. And I will tell you this, you probably, if you're out there talking to people, you'll use different ones, parts of different ones to talk to people. And sometimes at the end of the day, you kind of go, that's the best I know. I don't understand why God would allow, you know, a parent to abuse a child. I don't get that, you know, other than to say that they're evil. But at the end of the day, I feel like God knows the end of the story. He always does. Why did my cousin's daughter die of a brain tumor at 15 years of age? That made no sense at all to me, right? Until I start to look and recognize the fact that in her death, so many people were impacted. Maybe she impacted more people in her 15 years than in dying than she would have if she had lived to be 85. I don't know that. I know the pain they went through, but...
I had the same thought. I sent you the note, Charlie Kirk.
Yeah.
Bruce.
And I think that could well be the thing.
Well, that's why I love the book he chose so much.
Yeah.
Because it kind of shows you that there's no way we can know what God is thinking or what he's doing, but in the long run, you know, God's going to be there for you.
Right.
And that's why I love that book so much.
And what did he ask them? What did God ask those guys? Do you remember? You said it to me.
Oh yeah, where were you when I
Where were
laid
you?
before
Yeah.
the foundations of the earth?
Exactly. I don't think I remember consulting you.
Yeah.
God's nicer than me.
Yeah.
So,
God has a sense of humor too with that, in a way.
you don't believe that? Look at a duck-billed platypus and that crazy looking thing. So, but I want to just kind of share that idea with you because what James is doing here in a very real sense is a form of a theodicy. He's saying, guys, you're going through this right now, but you need to remember who God is. Right? And so he says here, every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, and every means anything good that you have in this life, anything good in this life came from God. Now, if you can grab that and make that practical in your life, you should never be at a loss for being thankful. I mean, that's really the case. Let me ask you guys, it's Thanksgiving this week, whatever. Let's shout out, what are you thankful for?
Living in such a great community.
I'm thankful I made it to this point in life. 2 years ago, I was unsure,
There it is, right on.
and I persevered.
Yeah.
Faith.
Yeah. And got a forward-thinking idea of the whole thing.
Yep.
So looking forward to today and tomorrow.
Said I got to stay at my wife's side.
That's right. Sure did.
Got a little eye roll out of that one.
Yeah, I
Sorry I ratted you out there.
know. when they say, "Well, I think he's going to make it,"
Lucy and Sheba need you too.
yeah.
Wait, I heard
all-
you.
That's why I said
love.
living in
It's all
such a
about
great
fun
community,
and
not
love.
only wildlife, but Nassau County. There's so many good things going on in this county. Unlike up north where I was, like it's just different. People are nicer here, and the whole county is great. I love it here.
Yeah, that's an easy thing to give thanks for. It's a great place. It really, really is. Others?
Well, I just got reminded, I was on domestic duty for my daughter's surgery for 2 weeks, and I just got reminded that I did a really good job as a mother and a wife, and like, I made it through, and there was just glimpses of doing that, but I'm so glad that that's over. And I
And she
really
turned out
love,
good. And she turned out
well, yeah, pretty good.
All right.
Anyway, but for me, it really taught me, it really made me thankful for this community and for choosing the harder right throughout my life
good.
against agitation and teasing and stuff like that. And it just made me really thankful that, that I'm not lonely anymore,
Mhm.
and I don't complain like I did before. And it's just because I was like telling her, this community in here is like a two-way street. And out in the world, it's a one-way street. Nobody has time for you.
Mhm.
The old lady with, the little old lady on the corner. They just go by and they got this and that and all the kids. And I thought about that when I was running them around and fixing dinner and laundry and all that. I thought, it's not me, it's life has consumed these people and they can't slow down enough to really be neighborly.
Got a lot of concerns in their lives. They really do.
Just a lot to do. I mean, a lot to do, and a lot of it, we put on ourselves with all the sports and all that stuff. But I was so thankful when I drove back through those gates Friday night. I was like, oh. So that's what I'm really thankful for this Thanksgiving.
Well, you said something, and I have to say this. When I hear this phrase in my head, it's always with your voice now, by the way. Thank you for this. Because I'll be going through something, thinking about something, I go, oh, that's a first world problem. That's a first world problem. And I hear it in Lee's voice now. So thank you for that. You're continuing to teach me, brother, as we go along. So we have a lot of those, don't we? Yeah. Anything else?
I'm really thankful for my family, and I really miss my parents.
Mhm.
I really am thankful for my family. Yeah, I'm happiest when we're all together.
Yeah, as crazy as family can be sometimes, the ones that are still here, you want to hold them a little tighter. Right? Yeah, I called my dad yesterday. I said, you got any projects for me? I need to know what tools to bring. But that's a blessing to be able to still serve.
Sure.
Yeah, don't take that for granted. For sure.
Bruce, I'll tell you one thing I'm really thankful for, and this is gonna sound weird, but for my back pain. And there's a reason for that, but I'll go into that story another time, though. It's just too long, but,
Thankful for your
God reminds you.
yeah.
God reminds you.
Make a long story short, I was in a car accident when I was younger. We were partying, drinking, smoking weed. I got crushed in the car, and they had to cut me out with the jaws of life, and I had back problems, and I prayed to God that I would change my life if he would get me out of this situation. And he got me out of the situation, and I didn't pray for him for a long time. So I got this back pain that constantly reminds me of that. And I'm happy about it, even though sometimes it hurts so bad, because whenever I get the pain, it automatically reminds me of what I prayed to Jesus. So that's why I count it as a blessing, actually.
I'm gonna start calling you Jacob.
I'm not
Kind of
Jacob.
Jacob
I'm not
experience.
Jacob.
Yeah.
But
So he says every good gift and every perfect gift. All right, and I don't want to slice that too close, because again, it's a sense of parallelism. But you know, most commentators do at least explain that good means beneficial or useful. So anything that's beneficial in your life, right? That's the idea, and that really speaks to God's general grace. And I don't think we can ever lose track of that. God's general grace means well. Jesus said in Matthew 5, right? For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and the unjust. I mean, everybody in this world that's breathing air is blessed by God. They would not be here except for him. But then he also says every perfect gift. And there's a sense there that means a couple of things. One, fully meeting our needs. Not only is it beneficial, it is absolutely beneficial, but also in accordance with God's will. And that should make sense, every perfect gift. And we're going to talk more about that in a minute. But it says it comes down from the Father of lights. And again, I saw that as I was looking through that, you know, that really is speaking about him as the creator and provider. And as James is writing to a predominantly Jewish-informed audience, they're immediately going to go back and think, and God created light. And it was good. Right? The first day of creation is God created light. And as we talked about that a few weeks ago. And because he's the creator, because he's the provider, he knows what you need, and he's able to give it. Now, does he always? No. Thank the Lord he doesn't always give us everything, because we'd abuse it probably. But then he says this about him, and I think it's an amazing thing. He says, with whom there is no variation or shadow of turning. God never changes. Or in Hebrews, it says Jesus Christ, the same yesterday, today, and forever. And think about the setting. Think about the international world setting that these people were in at the time that James wrote this. What was the predominant religion? There was emperor worship, right? But underneath of that, what was the predominant religion in the Roman Empire? It was a pantheon of gods, right? The Greek gods and then the Roman gods, right? So you had, depending on whether you're Greek and Roman, you had Jupiter and Hera and Apollo and all of them, right? And if you studied mythology half a minute, the thing we know about the gods in the Greek and the Roman pantheon was they were arbitrary and completely capricious. They could change their thoughts in a heartbeat. You'd be their friend one minute and their enemy the next. They'd go from giving you stuff to turning you into something the next, right? That's who they were, and that's the world that these people lived in. And yet here we see God never changing. His creation does, and they've said that the Father of lights speaks to, because of the words that are there, it's not just God created light, but it's the idea that as the planets move and the shadows, and you think about just if you do a sped up time delay, not time delay, what's it called? When you take a picture and it just runs, whatever that's called.
Time lapse.
Time lapse, thank you. I knew it was something like that. If you did a time lapse from sunrise to sunset, right, and ran it in like 2 minutes, isn't it amazing? I know you've seen those kind of things. The clouds are moving and the sun's shining, it's down and all those kind of things. I mean, it's amazing when we see it sped up how variant God's creation is, right? And so that's kind of the sense they're giving there, but God never changes. That also means that he doesn't play favorites, and I love this one, and he never has a bad day. God never has a bad day, guys. It's an amazing thing. I don't know about you, I do. But then he says in verse 18, of his own free will, of his own will, he brought us forth by the word of truth that we might be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. Of his own will. That means it was God's purpose, his desire, his attention, not something that was forced by anybody else. And you have to be careful in your theology, because lots of times what we do in our theology without realizing is we put us in charge and God responds to us. That's not how God operates. That's not how he operates. God's in charge. Always in charge. But think about that. He's writing to a group of Jewish believers, and so in a very real sense what he's saying there is he's given us new life through the word of truth, which makes me think of the gospel, right? The word of truth. But here's some other ideas. God's spoken word at creation. Let there be light. And then take it a little bit further. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Logos that we see in John chapter 1. And then finally, the Spirit of truth, the Holy Spirit. So when he says that we might be a kind of first fruits of his creatures, you guys, I know you can. Can you guys know what first fruits are in the Bible? You guys know what that means?
Bringing your best to the Lord.
Okay, yeah, going back to the sacrifice, right? Always the first.
Yes.
Jesus was
Christ
first
is
fruit.
the first fruit.
Jesus was first fruit,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. That was always, you always took
The best.
the best to the Lord, right? That's the first fruits. But it was also something else. The first fruit also was a promise of the coming harvest, right? Because you think about it, when the first fruits came, there was still a lot more harvest to come. You know, you got to think about that. I mean, how many of you guys have ever gardened? Most of you, right? Aren't you pumped when the first tomato shows up, or the first strawberry or whatever? Love that. Matter of fact, sometimes you rush that first one a little bit. Still letting it go to full size, at least I do. So we who are followers of Jesus Christ are the first fruits of humanity. We're dedicated to God, but we're the promise of more to come, right? Until such time as Jesus returns, there's still more of a harvest. So we need to think about that. So what I really want you guys to take away from all this today is this, that we need to give God thanks for all the good that he pours into our life. And sometimes the good is so small, really. I mean, you really don't think about it sometimes. It's like something as simple as we were going out on 200 the other night, and there was a break in traffic both directions.
You didn't have to go to Wildlife to use a light?
No, we
That's
came
right.
out to cross town, and there were we could go all the way across and didn't have to wait. It was like, yee-haw, you know.
For sure.
I'm sorry, that's a good thing. I'm all over that, you know, because I don't know if anybody's ever sat and waited there for 3 minutes and felt
That's
like.
why I go to the light.
Yeah.
But all the good we have, you know, family, friends, neighborhood, you know, all of that pales in comparison to what Jesus did for us. And so, all the good stuff is from God. Just give him thanks this year. And hopefully somewhere along the way with a family member or somebody you come in contact with, just maybe give yourself a chance to brag on God just a little bit. And let them know how good he is. And how good he is to them.